The cold barrel of a revolver pressed against Katherine Cole's temple made the shouting and piano music of the Rusty Nail Saloon fade into silence. Through tear-filled eyes, she stared at the man who had moments ago been her fiancé, now revealed as something far more sinister. "You ain't leaving Deadwood with a penny of my money, you thieving whore," Silas Monroe hissed, his breath heavy with whiskey and tobacco. The other patrons of the saloon stared, frozen in a tableau of shock and morbid fascination. The year was 1878, and in this Dakota Territory boomtown, justice was often dispensed from the barrel of a gun. Katherine's hands trembled as she clutched her small satchel. "Silas, please. This is my mother's locket, not your money. I never took anything from you." Liar. His free hand struck her cheek hard enough to send her reeling backward. "I know you've been planning to run, taking what's mine bit by bit." Katherine stumbled, her back hitting the bar. The bartender, an older man who'd shown her kindness during her 3 months in Deadwood, looked away, unwilling to challenge Silas and his notorious temper. "I changed my mind about marrying you. That's all," she whispered, tasting blood on her lip. Silas cocked the hammer of his revolver. "Nobody changes their mind about marrying Silas Monroe. Nobody." Katherine closed her eyes, waiting for the sound that would end her life. Instead, she heard the deep voice of the saloon owner. "Put the gun down, Monroe. No killing in my establishment. Take it outside or holster it." Silas's face contorted with rage, but he slowly lowered the weapon. "Fine, but you," he jabbed a finger at Katherine, "you're coming with me to explain yourself proper." Terror gripped Katherine's heart. She knew what explaining herself proper meant. She'd seen the bruises he'd left on other women who'd crossed him. With a sudden surge of desperate courage, she shoved past him and ran, weaving between tables and patrons. Behind her, Silas cursed and lunged, but a drunk miner stumbled into his path, giving her precious seconds. Katherine burst through the batwing doors of the saloon and out into the bitter cold of the Dakota Territory night. Tears streamed down her face as she ran blindly down the muddy Main Street, her thin dress offering no protection against the biting January wind. She made it halfway down the street before her worn boot heel caught in the rutted mud. She pitched forward, landing hard on her hands and knees. Behind her, she heard Silas burst out of the saloon, his angry shouts cutting through the night air. "You can't run from me, Katherine. This town ain't big enough." Katherine struggled to her feet, her whole body shaking with cold and fear. Her tears came harder now, clouding her vision as she stumbled forward, away from the only place she'd found work since arriving in this god-forsaken mining town. Miss, are you all right?" The voice came from the shadows beside the assayer's office. A tall figure stepped out, a man in dusty range clothes, his face partially obscured by the wide brim of his hat. "Please," Katherine gasped, "he'll kill me." Without hesitation, the man shrugged off his heavy wool coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The warmth of it was startling after the bitter cold, and the weight of it steadied her trembling form. "Who's after you?" he asked, his voice low and calm. "Silas Monroe. I was supposed to marry him, but Monroe." The stranger's body tensed. "I know the man, nothing but trouble." He glanced back toward the saloon, where Silas was now scanning the street, his gun drawn. "Come with me, quick now." Katherine hesitated for only a second before allowing the stranger to guide her into the narrow alley beside the assayer's office. Her mind screamed caution. Following an unknown man into a dark alley could end just as badly as facing Silas, but something in his steady gaze reassured her. "Name's Gabriel Ryan," he said as they moved deeper into the shadows. "Most folks call me Gabe." "Katherine Cole," she replied, clutching his coat tighter around her shoulders. "I'm sorry to involve you in this." "Any decent man would help a lady in distress," Gabe replied, leading her behind a stack of empty crates. "Monroe's got a reputation, not a good one." Katherine nodded, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. "I discovered that too late. I came to Deadwood 3 months ago, took a job at the saloon serving drinks. He seemed charming at first. They usually do." Gabe's voice carried a hint of bitterness. "Wait here a moment." He stepped around the crates, scanning the street. Katherine huddled in his coat, inhaling the scent of leather, horse, and the faintest trace of tobacco. Despite the dire circumstances, she found herself studying her rescuer. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a strong jaw darkened by stubble. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, marking him as a working cowboy rather than one of the dandies or desperados that frequented Deadwood. "He's still looking," Gabe reported, ducking back beside her. "Got 2 of his mining friends helping now. We need to get you somewhere safe." "There's nowhere safe in Deadwood," Katherine whispered. "Silas has friends everywhere. The sheriff won't help. They play cards every Sunday." Gabe frowned, considering. "I've got a camp outside town. I'm here with a cattle drive, delivering beef to the mining camps. My boss and the boys would make sure Monroe didn't bother you." Katherine stared at him, weighing her options. She had no family in Deadwood, no real friends, just a rented room above the milliner's shop and her job at the saloon, both now lost to her. "Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice soft with suspicion born of hard lessons. Gabe's eyes met hers, and in the dim light reflected from the street, she saw honesty there. "My sister ran from a man like Monroe once. Nobody helped her." He looked away. "She didn't make it." The simple, painful truth of it silenced any further questions. Katherine nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Ryan. It's Gabe, and we should move now while Monroe's checking the other direction." He led her through a series of alleys and narrow passages between buildings, clearly familiar with the town's layout. Katherine struggled to keep up, her thin shoes slipping on the frozen ground. Once she nearly fell, and Gabe's strong hand caught her elbow, steadying her. "Sorry," she murmured. "These aren't meant for running." Gabe glanced down at her impractical footwear and without warning swept her into his arms. "Begging your pardon, Miss Cole, but we need to move faster." Katherine was too shocked to protest. No man had ever carried her like this, certainly not Silas, whose idea of chivalry extended only to buying her drinks and making grand promises he never intended to keep. They reached the outskirts of town without encountering Silas or his friends. Gabe set her down beside a hitching post where a chestnut gelding waited patiently. "That's Thunder," Gabe said, patting the horse's neck. "Best cow pony in the territory." Katherine approached the animal cautiously. "Hello, Thunder," she whispered, reaching out to stroke his velvety nose. The horse nickered softly. "He likes you," Gabe observed, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "That's a good sign. He's particular about people." "I grew up around horses," Katherine said. "My father had a small ranch in Nebraska before." She trailed off, the familiar pain of loss momentarily overwhelming her. "Before," Gabe prompted gently. Katherine swallowed hard. "Before he lost it gambling, and then lost his life in a gunfight over debts." Gabe nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'm sorry to hear that." He adjusted his saddle. "Can you ride? It's about 3 miles to our camp." "I can ride," Katherine confirmed, gathering her courage. "But Mr. Ryan, Gabe, what if Silas comes looking? I don't want to bring trouble to you and your friends." Gabe's expression hardened. "Let him come. The double crescent outfit doesn't take kindly to men who threaten women." He held out his hand. "Now, if you're ready." Katherine took his hand and allowed him to help her up onto Thunder's back. Gabe swung up behind her, his chest warm and solid against her back. As they rode away from Deadwood, Katherine felt a curious mixture of terror and relief. She was leaving everything she knew, heading into the unknown with a man she'd just met. Yet somehow, with Gabe's strong arms around her as he held Thunder's reins, she felt safer than she had in months. The cattle drive camp was nestled in a small valley about 3 miles outside Deadwood. As they approached, Katherine saw the glow of campfires and heard the low lowing of cattle. Several men moved about the camp, tending to chores or relaxing after a day's work. "That's the remuda," Gabe explained, pointing to a collection of horses corralled with rope. "We've got about 15 hands on this drive, brought 500 head of cattle up from Wyoming for the mining camps." As they rode into camp, heads turned. Katherine felt suddenly self-conscious, aware of how she must look a saloon girl in a thin dress, wearing a man's coat, her face tear-streaked and her hair disheveled. An older man with a silver-streaked beard approached as Gabe helped Katherine dismount. "Ryan was beginning to think you'd found yourself more interesting company than ours in town." His eyes flickered to Katherine, curious but not unkind. "Mr. Fletcher, this is Miss Katherine Cole." Gabe said formally. "She's in some trouble. A man named Monroe was threatening her." Fletcher's bushy eyebrows rose. "Silas Monroe, the mining man," Katherine nodded, surprised. "You know him." "Know of him," Fletcher corrected. "He's got investments all through these hills, and a reputation for being mean as a rattlesnake when crossed." He looked at Gabe. "What kind of trouble are we talking about, Ryan?" Gabe explained the situation briefly. As he spoke, other cowboys gathered around, their expressions growing harder as they heard how Silas had threatened Katherine. "Well, Miss Cole," Fletcher said when Gabe finished, "any friend of Gabe's is welcome at our fire. You'll be safe here tonight." "Thank you, sir," Katherine said, touched by the simple kindness of these rough men. "I don't want to impose no imposition," Fletcher interrupted. "We've got plenty of grub and you can have my tent. I'll bunk with the cook." Before Katherine could protest further, a lean, weathered man with a bandana tied around his neck stepped forward. "Madam, I'm Hank, the camp cook. Got some stew still warm if you're hungry." Katherine suddenly realized she hadn't eaten since noon. "That would be wonderful, thank you." As Hank led her to the chuck wagon, Katherine heard Fletcher speaking in low tones to Gabe. "Monroe ain't a man to cross lightly, son. He's got friends in this territory." "I know," Gabe replied, his voice equally low, "but I couldn't leave her there." "Naw, you couldn't," Fletcher agreed. "Not in your nature, just be careful. That girl's carrying trouble with her, even if it ain't her fault." Katherine pretended not to hear as she accepted a tin plate of fragrant stew from Hank. The food was simple but delicious, rich with beef and root vegetables that had clearly been stored carefully for the winter drive. "This is wonderful," she told Hank sincerely. The cook ducked his head, pleased. "Just trail food, madam, but I do what I can. Got some sourdough bread too, if you'd like." After she'd eaten, one of the younger cowboys brought her a cup of strong, sweet coffee. Gabe joined her by the fire, sitting close enough to share his warmth but not so close as to be improper. "What will you do now?" he asked quietly, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Katherine stared into her coffee, confronting the question she'd been avoiding. "I don't know, I can't go back to Deadwood." "No," Gabe agreed. "That wouldn't be safe." "I could try Cheyenne," she said, thinking aloud. "Or Denver. Somewhere Silas doesn't have influence, both a long way from here," Gabe observed. "Especially in winter," Katherine nodded, the enormity of her situation settling over her like a heavy blanket. She had little money, just what she'd managed to save from her meager salary at the saloon. Certainly not enough for a stagecoach ticket to Denver. "Our drive's heading back to Wyoming when we're done here," Gabe said after a moment. "About a week more, you could ride with us if you wanted." "At least as far as Cheyenne," Katherine looked up, surprised by the offer. "I couldn't impose like that." "It's no imposition," Gabe insisted. "We're going that way anyhow." "Would your boss allow it?" "Fletcher, he's gruff but he's fair, and he hates men who hurt women almost as much as I do." Katherine studied Gabe's face, trying to discern his motives. She'd learned the hard way that men rarely offered help without expecting something in return, yet something in Gabe's steady gaze told her his offer was genuine. "I don't know the first thing about cattle drives," she admitted. Gabe smiled, a warm expression that transformed his serious face. "Not much to know from a passenger's perspective. Just stay on your horse and don't spook the herd." "I don't have a horse," Katherine pointed out. "We've got extra mounts. You can ride Belle, she's gentle as they come." Katherine looked around the camp at the cowboys settling in for the night, at the vast herd of cattle beyond, at the endless expanse of stars overhead. It was a world away from the saloon, from Deadwood, from Silas. A world that offered something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. "All right," she decided. "If Mr. Fletcher agrees, I'll ride with you to Cheyenne." Gabe's smile widened. "Good, that's real good, Miss Cole." "Katherine," she corrected him. "Or Kate, if you prefer." "Kate," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "It suits you." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant sounds of cattle settling for the night. For the first time in months, Katherine felt the knot of anxiety in her chest begin to loosen. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, at least, she was safe. When the fire burned low, Fletcher showed Katherine to his tent, insisting again that she take it while he bunked elsewhere. The tent was simple but clean, with a bedroll laid out on a ground sheet. "It ain't much," Fletcher apologized, but it'll keep the wind off. It's perfect, Katherine assured him. Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Fletcher, the old cattleman nodded. Gabe's a good judge of character. If he says you're worth helping, that's good enough for me. He hesitated, then added, Monroe might come looking. If he does, you stay put in here. Let us handle him. Katherine nodded, grateful but concerned. I don't want anyone getting hurt because of me. Fletcher's weathered face creased in a smile. Don't you worry about us, Miss Cole. We've faced worse than mining men with inflated opinions of themselves. After he left, Katherine removed her shoes and lay down on the bedroll, still wrapped in Gabe's coat. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. The events of the day played through her mind on endless repeat. Silas's rage, her desperate flight, Gabe's unexpected kindness. What would have happened if he hadn't been there? The thought made her shudder. Outside, she could hear the low murmur of men's voices around the dying fire. One voice, Gabe's, rose occasionally above the others, deep and reassuring. She found herself focusing on that voice, letting it lull her toward sleep. Just as she was drifting off, she heard hoofbeats approaching the camp. Katherine sat bolt upright, her heart pounding. Had Silas found her already? She heard shouts, then the unmistakable sound of Gabe's voice, stern and unyielding. That's far enough, Monroe. Katherine crept to the tent flap and peered out. In the dim light of the banked fire, she could make out Silas astride his black stallion, flanked by 2 other riders. Facing them was Gabe, along with Fletcher and several of the cowboys. All had rifles or revolvers at the ready. I've come for my fiancé, Silas announced, his voice carrying clearly through the night air. The woman you stole from town. Nobody stole anybody, Gabe replied evenly. Miss Cole left of her own free will, Silas snorted. That's so, then you won't mind if I speak to her myself. Actually, I would mind, Gabe said, taking a step forward. She doesn't want to see you, Monroe. Best you turn around and head back to Deadwood. Silas's hand drifted toward his holster. You don't give orders to me, Cowboy. I own half the claims in these hills. Maybe so, Fletcher interjected, his rifle aimed squarely at Silas's chest. But you don't own this land we're camped on, nor the woman you're looking for. Katherine held her breath as tension stretched between the 2 groups. Silas's companions looked nervous, eyeing the number of armed cowboys surrounding them. This isn't over, Silas finally growled, jerking his horse's head around. The girls made a fool of me, and I don't forget that kind of thing. Neither do we, Gabe replied coolly. Remember that if you're thinking of coming back. Silas spurred his horse, his companions following quickly. Katherine watched them disappear into the darkness, relief washing over her like a wave. She hadn't realized how terrified she'd been of Silas dragging her back to Deadwood until the danger had passed. She slipped back into the tent before anyone could notice her watching. A few minutes later, she heard a soft voice outside. Kate, are you awake? Yes, she called softly. Come in, Gabe. He ducked through the tent flap, his tall frame filling the small space. I wanted to make sure you were all right. I heard Monroe ride in. I heard too, Katherine admitted. Thank you for standing up to him. Gabe shrugged, the gesture dismissive but not unkind. He's a bully. Most bullies back down when confronted. Not Silas, Katherine warned. He holds grudges. So Fletcher reminded me. Gabe settled himself near the tent entrance, keeping a respectful distance. We'll post guards tonight just to be safe, but I doubt he'll be back before morning if at all. Men like him prefer to fight on their own terms with the odds stacked in their favor. Katherine nodded, knowing he was right. I'm sorry to bring this trouble to you and your friends. Don't apologize, Gabe said firmly. None of this is your fault. Katherine pulled his coat tighter around her shoulders. You don't even know me, yet you're risking so much. Gabe was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful in the dim light filtering through the tent canvas. Sometimes you just know when something's the right thing to do, he paused. My sister, the one I mentioned her name, was Rose. She married young to a man named Thornton. Seemed decent at first, but once they were wed, he changed. Started drinking, then hitting her when she'd displease him. Katherine's heart ached at the familiar story. I'm so sorry, Gabe, he nodded, acknowledging her sympathy. She ran away twice. First time, our parents sent her back, saying marriage was forever. Second time, she came to me. I was working a ranch in Colorado. I should have helped her hide, should have stood up to Thornton when he came looking. His voice grew rough with old grief. Instead, I convinced her to go back, try to make it work. A month later, she was dead. An accident, Thornton claimed, fell down the stairs. Katherine reached out impulsively, touching his hand. You couldn't have known. I knew enough, Gabe replied, his fingers briefly squeezing hers before he withdrew his hand. I've carried that with me for 5 years now, so when I saw you running from Monroe, tears on your face, he trailed off, then straightened his shoulders. Anyway, that's why, and it's reason enough. Katherine nodded, understanding now the depth of his commitment to helping her. Thank you for telling me about Rose. I'm truly sorry for your loss. Get some rest, Gabe said, rising to leave. Tomorrow we'll find you some proper clothes for the trail. Can't have you riding in that dress. After he left, Katherine lay back down, her mind filled with thoughts of the quiet, determined cowboy who'd risked himself to help a stranger. She'd been so wrong about Silas, charmed by his superficial gallantry and promises of security. Gabe was something else entirely. A man whose decency ran bone deep, whose actions spoke louder than any honeyed words. As sleep finally claimed her, Katherine wondered what kind of future awaited her in Cheyenne and whether Gabe Ryan might somehow be part of it. The next week passed in a blur of new experiences for Katherine. True to his word, Gabe found her more suitable clothing, a pair of denim trousers that had belonged to a young cowhand who'd left the drive early, a flannel shirt, and a warm jacket. The outfit was far from fashionable, but it was practical for the trail, and Katherine found herself enjoying the freedom of movement the trousers provided. The cattle drive moved at a steady pace, delivering beef to various mining camps throughout the Black Hills before turning southwest toward Wyoming territory. Katherine rode Belle, a gentle bay mare with a white blaze who seemed to take a liking to her immediately. She's usually standoffish with strangers, Gabe observed on their second day, watching as Belle nuzzled Katherine's palm for treats. Must be your way with horses, Katherine smiled, stroking the mare's neck. My father used to say I had a gift. That I understood horses better than people sometimes. Your father might have been right, Gabe said, though you seem to understand people pretty well too. Katherine thought of Silas, of how thoroughly she'd misunderstood his character. Not always, she admitted. I misjudged Silas completely. Monroe's type are good at deception, Gabe said. They show you what you want to see until they have you where they want you. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the cattle moving steadily ahead of them under the watchful eyes of the other cowboys. The day was cold but clear, the winter sun casting long shadows across the snow-dusted hills. Tell me about your family, Gabe said eventually. You mentioned your father had a ranch, Katherine nodded, memories both sweet and painful surfacing. A small spread in Nebraska. Nothing fancy, but it was home. My mother died when I was 12, fever took her. After that, it was just father and me, she sighed. He was a good man in many ways, but weak when it came to gambling. Cards, horses, anything he could bet on. He lost the ranch when I was 16. That's young to lose your home, Gabe observed. We moved to town after that. Father took odd jobs. I worked as a seamstress. It was a hard living, but we managed. Katherine's voice grew softer. Then he got into a game with some professional gamblers passing through. Lost everything we had left and borrowed more when he couldn't pay. She trailed off, the memory still painful after all these years. I'm sorry, Gabe said quietly. Losing family that way, it's a hard thing. What about you? Katherine asked, eager to shift the focus. You mentioned Rose. Do you have other family? Parents are still alive, living in Missouri. 2 brothers, both married with children now. A small smile touched his lips. I'm the black sheep, the one who couldn't settle down. You prefer the open range, Gabe nodded, looking out over the rolling landscape. Always have. There's something about this life, the freedom of it, I suppose, though it gets lonely sometimes. Katherine understood that feeling all too well. After her father's death, she drifted from town to town, taking whatever work she could find. The loneliness had been a constant companion, pushing her to accept Silas's proposal far too quickly. How did you end up in Deadwood? Gabe asked, as if reading her thoughts. I heard there was good money to be made in the mining towns, Katherine explained. Women are scarce, so even serving drinks pays better than sewing in some settled place. I arrived last October, found work at the Rusty Nail. Silas started courting me almost immediately. She shook her head, still amazed at her own naivety. He seemed so different than generous, attentive. Said he was going to build the biggest house in Deadwood for us. When did you realize he wasn't what he seemed? Catherine's expression darkened. About a month ago. I overheard him talking to a friend about how he'd tamed me, how once we were married, I'd learn my place quick enough. She shuddered at the memory. Then I noticed things I'd overlooked before, how he treated others when he thought I wasn't watching, the cruelty that would flash in his eyes when he was crossed. So you tried to end it, Katherine nodded. I told him I needed more time before marriage. He seemed to accept that at first, but grew more insistent, more controlling. Then yesterday, I finally gathered my courage and told him I couldn't marry him at all. That's when. She gestured vaguely at her face where a faint bruise still marked her cheek from Silas's blow. Gabe's jaw tightened, his eyes hardening. No man has the right to strike a woman, ever. Not everyone shares that view, Katherine said quietly. In Deadwood, many would say Silas was within his rights, that I led him on, then changed my mind. Then they'd be wrong, Gabe said simply. His certainty was comforting. They rode on, the conversation turning to lighter topics, favorite books. They both enjoyed Twain, childhood memories, dreams for the future. Katherine found herself laughing at Gabe's dry humor, relaxing in a way she hadn't with a man in a very long time. As the days passed, she grew more comfortable with the routine of the cattle drive. She learned to help with simple camp chores, even tried her hand at cooking under Hank's gruff tutelage. The Cowboys, initially wary of having a woman in camp, soon accepted her presence with good-natured respect. But it was Gabe she found herself drawn to most. He was unfailingly kind but never condescending, respectful of her independence while offering help when needed. In the evenings, they would often sit together by the fire, talking long after the others had retired. On their fifth night out from Deadwood, a winter storm blew in from the north, forcing the drive to make camp early in a sheltered valley. The men worked quickly to secure the herd and establish windbreaks for the camp. Katherine helped Hank prepare a hearty stew, thankful for the activity that kept her warm as temperatures plummeted. "Storm's getting worse," Fletcher announced as they huddled around the fire that evening, snow swirling beyond the circle of light. "Might be laid up here a day or two." The Cowboys grumbled good-naturedly, but Katherine felt a twinge of anxiety. Every day delayed was another day Silas might be tracking them, another day before she reached the relative safety of Cheyenne. Gabe, seated beside her, seemed to sense her concern. "Don't worry," he said quietly. "Even Monroe's not fool enough to follow us in this weather." "I hope you're right," she replied, pulling her borrowed jacket tighter against the cold. Later, as the camp settled for the night, Katherine made her way to the small tent she'd been given. The wind had picked up, driving snow through every tiny gap in the canvas. Despite her exhaustion, she found herself shivering too much to sleep. A soft voice called from outside. "Kate, you still awake?" "Yes," she answered, recognizing Gabe's voice. "Come in quickly, the wind's fierce." He ducked into the tent, bringing a rush of cold air and a few snowflakes with him. In his arms was a thick buffalo robe. "Thought you might need this. Temperature's dropping fast." "Thank you," Katherine said gratefully, accepting the heavy fur. "Where did you get it?" "Fletcher's been carrying it since we left Wyoming. Says his old bones can't take the cold like they used to." Gabe helped her spread the robe over her bedroll. "Should keep you warm enough." As he straightened, their eyes met in the dim light of the small lantern Katherine had been allotted. Something passed between them, a current of awareness that had been building slowly over the past days. "You should get some rest," Gabe said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "Storm might break by morning." Katherine nodded, suddenly very aware of his presence in the confined space of the tent. "Gabe," she said impulsively, "thank you, not just for the robe, for everything." He smiled, the expression softening his features. "No need to thank me, Kate. I'm just glad I was there when you needed help." "So am I," she whispered. For a moment, it seemed he might say more, might even step closer. Instead, he nodded and ducked back out into the storm, leaving Katherine with the buffalo robe and a strange, fluttering sensation in her chest that had nothing to do with the cold. The storm raged for 2 days, forcing the cattle drive to remain camped in the sheltered valley. By the time it passed, a foot of new snow blanketed the landscape, making travel slow and difficult. It took them 3 more days to reach the Wyoming border, and another 4 to approach the outskirts of Cheyenne. During those days, Katherine and Gabe grew closer still. She learned about his 5 years working cattle drives throughout the West, his dream of someday having his own small ranch, his quiet pride in being one of Fletcher's most trusted hands. In turn, she shared more of her own hopes of finding a place to settle, of perhaps opening a small dressmaking shop, of building a life that belonged to her alone. What remained unspoken was the growing attraction between them. It revealed itself in small ways, his hand lingering when helping her mount Belle, her eyes seeking him out whenever the drive stopped to rest, the way they naturally gravitated toward each other around the evening fire. Katherine tried to guard her heart, reminding herself of how wrong she'd been about Silas. But Gabe was different in every way that mattered. Where Silas had been all charm and flash, Gabe was steady and true. Where Silas had demanded, Gabe offered. Where Silas had sought to control, Gabe respected her independence. The day before they were set to reach Cheyenne, Fletcher called for an early camp beside a clear creek. The weather had turned surprisingly mild for February, with sunshine melting much of the snow from south-facing slopes. "We'll make Cheyenne by noon tomorrow," Fletcher announced as they dismounted. "Figured we could all use a proper rest before hitting town." As the cowboys set about their usual tasks, Gabe approached Katherine, who was unsaddling Belle. "I thought I might go fishing," he said, nodding toward the creek. "Care to join me?" Katherine smiled, surprised by the invitation. "I haven't fished since I was a girl." "It's like riding a horse you never really forget," Gabe assured her. Besides, Hank would appreciate some fresh fish to go with the beans. They gathered simple fishing gear from the chuck wagon and made their way to a quiet bend in the creek. The afternoon sun was warm on their faces as they sat side by side on a fallen log, lines dropped into the clear water. "What will you do in Cheyenne?" Gabe asked after they'd been sitting in companionable silence for a while. Katherine had been pondering that very question for days. "Find work, I suppose. Save enough to maybe continue on to Denver eventually." Gabe nodded, his eyes on the water. "Cheyenne's a decent town, bit rough in places but growing fast. You shouldn't have trouble finding work as a seamstress." "And you?" Katherine asked. "Where will you go after Cheyenne?" "Back to the ranch in Wyoming with Fletcher and the boys," Gabe replied. "At least until the spring cattle drive." He hesitated, then added, "Unless I had reason to stay." Katherine's heart beat faster at the implication in his words. What kind of reason might that be? Gabe turned to face her, his expression serious. "Kate, he broke off as his fishing line suddenly went taut. "I've got one." The moment shattered as he leapt up to land the fish, a respectable trout that would indeed make Hank happy. Katherine couldn't help laughing at Gabe's boyish excitement as he showed off his catch. "Your turn now," he challenged, helping her bait her hook again. They spent the next hour catching several more fish, their earlier conversations seemingly forgotten. But as they gathered their gear to head back to camp, Gabe touched Katherine's arm, stopping her. "What I was trying to say before," he began, his voice low and sincere, "is that I've come to care for you, Kate, more than I expected to. More than might be wise, given how we met and all that's happened." Katherine's breath caught. "Gabe, you don't have to say anything," he hurried on. "I know you've been through a lot. You're still healing from Monroe's betrayal. I just wanted you to know that. That if you wanted to stay in Cheyenne a while, I'd have reason to stay too." Katherine looked up into his earnest face, seeing the hope and vulnerability there. How different he was from Silas, whose declarations of affection had always seemed designed to impress rather than express genuine feeling. "I've come to care for you too," she admitted softly. "But I'm afraid, Gabe, afraid of making another mistake, of trusting too easily." Gabe nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I know, and I'd never rush you, Kate. All I'm asking is a chance to prove I'm nothing like Monroe." Katherine thought of the past 10 days of Gabe's constant kindness, his respect, his quiet strength. He'd never once made her feel beholden to him for his help, never used her vulnerability to his advantage. "I think," she said slowly, "that you've already started to prove that." Gabe's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Carefully giving her every chance to pull away, he reached out to take her hand. His calloused fingers were warm against hers, the touch sending a shiver up her arm that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. Then maybe, he suggested, we could see where this leads. No promises, no pressure, just time together in Cheyenne. Katherine nodded, a smile spreading across her face. I'd like that, Gabe, I'd like that very much. They walked back to camp hand in hand, their string of fish and the unspoken promise between them equally precious bounty. That evening, the mood in camp was festive, with Hank frying the fresh fish and even producing a flask of whiskey that he shared sparingly among the men. Someone produced a harmonica, and soon music filled the night air. Katherine sat beside Gabe, closer than she would have dared a week before. The warmth of his shoulder against hers was comforting, exciting, and right all at once. "Dance with me?" he asked when one of the cowboys began playing a slow, sweet tune. Katherine hesitated only briefly before nodding. Gabe led her a little away from the fire, into a space between the wagons. His hand settled respectfully at her waist, the other taking hers. They moved together in the simple box step that was all the limited space allowed, but it was enough. "I never thanked you properly," Katherine said as they danced, "for that night in Deadwood. For the coat you put around my shoulders when I was crying and afraid." Gabe's eyes were soft in the distant firelight. "You don't need to thank me for that, Kate." "I do," she insisted, "because that act of kindness changed everything for me. It showed me that there are good men in this world, men nothing like Silas." "There are," Gabe agreed, "and I aim to be one of them." "You already are," Katherine assured him, resting her head against his chest as they continued to sway to the music. The next morning, the drive set out for the final leg to Cheyenne. Katherine rode beside Gabe, both of them quiet with anticipation of what awaited them in town and what might develop between them. As the buildings of Cheyenne appeared on the horizon, Katherine felt a curious mixture of excitement and trepidation. She was about to start yet another new chapter of her life in yet another unfamiliar place. But this time she wouldn't be alone. Gabe must have sensed her thoughts. Nervous? He asked. Katherine smiled at him, a little but also hopeful, more hopeful than I've been in a long time. "Hope is good," Gabe said, reaching across the space between their horses to briefly squeeze her hand. "It's a start." And as they rode into Cheyenne together, Katherine knew that it was indeed just that, a start. Not an ending to her troubles or a magical solution to her past, but the beginning of something new. Something built on mutual respect and genuine caring rather than false promises and control. Whether it led to deeper love or simply a healing friendship, Katherine was grateful for that snowy night in Deadwood when a kind cowboy had wrapped his coat around the shoulders of a woman in tears, and in doing so, had wrapped her in hope as well.